Good day and welcome back to my channel. Today we will be looking at part 3 of probability. In the previous video we looked at Venn diagrams. In today's video we will be looking at tree diagrams. Tree diagrams are useful when two or more consecutive events are taking place. They can be used for both dependent and independent events. Now, we've previously discussed what dependent and independent events are. When dealing with tree diagrams, remember to multiply across and add going downwards. Now, that last sentence doesn't make much sense, but it will make sense when we go through an example. Let's look at a basic example of a tree diagram. The example reads, a coin is tossed twice. Determine the probability of getting a heads, then a tails. Since there's more than one event taking place, it's best to use a tree diagram. Let me show you how to draw a tree diagram for this scenario. The tree diagram starts off at a point and it branches off depending how many possibilities there are. So looking at the first event is tossing a coin and there's only two possibilities, a heads or a tails. So each branch represents each possibility. And then we're going to label the branches. So the top branch we'll call heads and the bottom branch we'll call tails. Now we need to determine the probability of getting each one. To get the probability of getting a heads, it's simply 1 over 2, as there's one head and two sides. And the probability of getting a tails is 1 over 2 as well, because there's only one tails. And a total number of two sides. Now for the second event, we have to do the exact same thing, but for each arm of the tree diagram. So the second event is again tossing a coin, so it branches out twice. One being heads and the other being tails. And then again, we're going to determine the probabilities of them occurring. And again, the probabilities are simply half. Now, this line here, when it branches off into this top line here, that's the probabilities of getting a heads and then a heads again. This here represents the probability of first getting a heads and then getting a tails. This line here represents the probability of getting the tails and then a heads after that. And the last line is getting a tails followed by a tails again. Now, we need to determine the probabilities of each of these, and to do that, we're going to look at the rule we had in the previous slide. For tree diagrams, we're going to multiply across and add going downwards. So, multiplying across, to get the probability of a heads and then a heads again, it's simply a half multiplied by a half. And a half multiplied by a half is just a quarter. Now, since all the probabilities in this tree diagram are half, the probabilities of getting a heads and then a tails and then a heads, a tails and then a tails are all a quarter, because it's a half multiplied by a half. So let's look at the question. The question says, determine the probability of getting a heads then a tails. And this is your probability here. It's a quarter. Now, the last part of our rule said we must multiply across and add going downwards. In a tree diagram, when we add all the probabilities together, they should add up to 1. And that's one way of verifying that your tree diagram is correct. So a quarter plus a quarter plus a quarter plus a quarter is simply equals to 1. Now let's look at a more complicated example of a tree diagram. The next example reads, a bag of marbles containing 4 green marbles, 3 blue marbles, and 3 red marbles. Draw a tree diagram representing 2 marbles being drawn from the bag, assuming that the marbles are not replaced after being drawn. Now, that last part is very important, assuming that the marbles are not replaced after being drawn. What does that mean? That means that our events now become dependent events, as there is no replacement. Let's draw the tree diagram for the scenario. So we have to draw 2 marbles from the bag, and there's a possibility of 3 colors being drawn. We can either draw a green, a blue, or a red. Right, so what's the probability of drawing a green marble? There's 4 green marbles and a total of 4 plus 3 plus 3. So there's 4 green marbles out of a total of 10 marbles. So the probability of drawing a green is 4 out of 10. The probability of drawing a blue is simply 3 over 10. And the probability of drawing a red is also 3 over 10, because both of them have 3 marbles out of a total of 10 marbles. Now this is where it gets interesting. Let's look at the second draw. In the second draw, we can again either get a blue, a green, or a red. Green, blue, and red. Okay, so the first part represents drawing a green first. So if we drew a green marble, now there's a total of 3 green marbles left in the bag because there's no replacement. And now the total number of marbles reduces to 9. So drawing a second green, the probability of that now becomes 3 over 9, because there's 3 green marbles left and there's only 9 in total. After we draw a green and then we want to draw a blue after that, there's still a total of 9 marbles, but now there's 3 blue marbles left, because in the first draw we drew a green marble, so there's still 3 blue left. Likewise with the red, there's still 3 red marbles left, but now the total number of marbles is 9. And the exact thing can be repeated for the blue and the red legs. So let's quickly do that. Okay, so in the first event, if we drew a blue marble, the probability of that was 3 over 10. But to draw a green marble thereafter would be 4 over 9. Why? Because if we drew a blue in the first draw, there's still 4 green left. But now the total number of marbles is 9. To draw a blue and then a red, to draw the red in the second draw, after drawing a blue, would simply be 3 over 9. Because there's 3 reds in the bag and there's a total of 9 marbles. Now, to draw a blue followed by a blue again, the probability would be 2 over 9. Because if we drew a blue in the first draw and we're not replacing it, there's only 2 blue marbles left and there's a total of 9 marbles. Now let's look at the situation where we're drawing a red marble in the first draw. If we drew a red marble and we don't replace it in the bag, the probability of getting a green would be 4 over 9, because there's still 4 greens left. The probability of getting a red now would be 2 over 9, because we drew 1 red already, so there's only 2 reds left in the bag and there's a total of 9 marbles. To draw a red followed by a blue, the blue in the second draw would simply be 3 over 9, because there's still 3 blues left and there's a total of 9 marbles. To complete this diagram, all we would need to do is multiply all the numbers going across to get all the different probabilities, and then we can add all the probabilities to total up to 1. Now let's just assume they asked us, what is the probability of getting a blue followed by a blue again? That would simply be 3 over 10 multiplied by 2 over 9, and that equals to 1 over 15. And like this, based on this tree diagram, you can answer several probability questions. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel.